But soon that false sense of security all came crashing down.
So Stephen he was doing a run from Thailand to Melbourne with a kilo of heroin. He was arrested at the airport. His father phoned me. As soon as I heard his dad's voice on the other end of the phone, I knew what had happened.
Stephen was handed down a chunky prison sentence for importing a kilo of heroin from Bangkok, eventually serving 7 years in prison in Australia. Holly began to make plans to return home to Australia, but the Bangkok police already had eyes on her. They'd figured out that she was sending small amounts of heroin back home to Australia through the post. And so, in August 2000, along with a fellow heroin user called Bob, she was finally arrested, picked up for sending off a package from a local post office.
As I got in the car and tried to close the door, all these men ran at the car. One was on Bob's side, there were a few at the front of the car, one was on my side, and I didn't know they were police. I thought we were getting robbed. So this cop and I are playing tug of war with the door. I'm trying to close it, he's trying to rip it open. That went on for a few seconds, and I was telling Bob, floor it, get out of here. But there was nowhere to go. So he got pulled out of his side, I got pulled out of my side, and yeah.
When were you like, okay, this is the police, this is serious?
Oh, I realised then that it was police.
So what goes through your mind at that point?
Oh, I knew right then and there. Like, I knew I was in trouble, but I wasn't sure for what. Until he asked me, have you been to the post office tonight? Then I realised, oh, okay, it's for that.
The police drove Holly to her apartment to search for more evidence. And on the way, her mind spun through everything that they would find there and what that would mean.
Oh, I know already what's going to happen. I'm going to jail for a very, very long time. There was no doubt about it. Like, I knew that.
I can't even imagine how that feels in that moment.
Oh, it was horrible. I can't even describe it. Like, it was devastating. I knew right at that moment that my whole life was gone. I really believed I would be in that prison for a long, long time. Yeah, like everything went through my head, you know, my mum, my dad, my brothers, my sisters, my life before, everything that had happened in our lives, I thought about, you know, mum getting addicted, dying, all of us on drugs, like, just, it all went through my head. And it was just really disappointing that that was going to be my future. It was devastating.
In her apartment, the police found another package of drugs, all sealed up and ready for posting. It was all they needed. Tell me about the first night when you were locked up in Bangkok. What's going through your mind?
I got there very early hours of the morning. They put me in a cell. There were a few other women there, but I couldn't make out if they were Thai or foreigners. So I just lay down on the floor, just watching them sleep.
How did you feel in that lockup?
Oh, devastated. Absolutely devastated. There's no words to describe it. It was just awful. It was bad enough just knowing what my future was going to now be. But it was horrible as well because I'm in a foreign country. I don't have friends here. I don't have family here. I don't speak the language. Yeah, there was a lot going on.
Holly described that night to me as the most scared that she's ever been in her life. Her thoughts spiralled into a very difficult place. You have said that you contemplated suicide while you were in that prison.
Oh yeah, I sure did. Yeah, look, you're in the cell 24 hours a day. So all you have to do is think. And I was in the headspace of, okay, well, if this is what the lockup's like, the jail is not going to be any better than this. It could even be worse. I knew I'd be there for a very, very, very long time. And I thought, you know what? I'm not doing it. I'm not going to live like this. But then I snapped myself out of it and was like, no, I'm not going to have police going around to tell my family that I have killed myself in a Thai lockup. I couldn't do it. Couldn't do it to them. And not only that, I didn't want to die. Not really.
Holly spent a few restless days and nights in jail before her first court appearance along with Bob. And at that appearance, two things quickly became clear. Firstly, there was going to be no hiding from the media. Sick with withdrawal, Holly says she was filled with shame as journalists questioned her and photographed her. Secondly, the seriousness of the charges were clear. Holly had been caught with 30 grams of heroin and Bob with 110 grams. But they were both being charged with a combined amount, which had a huge impact on the potential sentence. With a quantity that large, the punishment could even be the death penalty.
There was a huge amount of media interest in your case, wasn't there? And I've looked at some of the headlines from the time. There was a lot of speculation about your future. Some quite difficult headlines actually there. You know, things like on death row and terrified, or addict faces execution push. Even one headline that just says shot she fears most, obviously referencing the potential firing squad that you faced. Were you aware of these stories? Did you think you were facing the death penalty?
No, I never did. Because it wasn't enough. I didn't have a big amount of heroin. It was a tiny amount. That's how I felt at the time.
The day of sentencing finally came 3 years after Holly had first been arrested, and in front of a court packed out with cameras and journalists, and with her brother and sister watching, she was handed down a 31-year prison sentence.
You were in the notorious, I think it is fair to say, Lat Yao prison. Tell me about life in prison.
It was just such a horrible place. It was just dreadful. I'd been in prison in Australia. I knew what prison was like, but this was just on a totally different level. I couldn't believe it. It was inhumane. There was no duty of care. There was nothing. You were put in there and left to fend for yourself.
Holly is looking at 31 years in this place, and it's starting to sink in just what that means. We're taking a quick break for the news, but when we come back, Holly's struggles in prison lead her to make a life-changing decision. Don't go away.
This is the BBC World Service, looking into Oregon's radical drug decriminalisation policy.
For the past 3 years, Oregon has wrestled with the country's boldest ever attempt at undoing the war on drugs through a groundbreaking new law, Measure 110.
The state's new drug decriminalization law turns possessing small amounts of street drugs into a violation, like a traffic ticket.
I'm Winston Ross, and I've lived in Oregon for 2 decades. I've been speaking to lawmakers and people who work and live on the streets at the coalface of the state's drug crisis.
There's been a 1,500% increase in fentanyl overdose deaths.
The state was painfully ill-equipped to handle this new surge.
Fentanyl is more addictive, more lethal, and cheaper than any drug. We have significant challenges ahead of us.
A reckoning with drugs in Oregon. Tuesday at 9:30 and 20 GMT.
Still to come on Outlook. Australian Holly Dean-Johns has been sentenced to decades in a Thai prison for drug trafficking when she decides to make a big personal change.
I woke up one morning, I sat there looking around at all the people, looking at where I was and where I was going to be for God knows how many more years. I just thought, what am I doing? Look what you've done to yourself. Look where you are.
That's coming up after these headlines.
ABC News with Neil Nunes. Nearly 70 former senior U.S. military officials and diplomats have urged President Joe Biden to take stronger measures against Israel if it denies civil rights and basic necessities to Palestinians in its military operation in Gaza.